So, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the ARC of Massachusetts webinar series. Today, we're going to be hearing from Paul Simone, who is a certified speech and language pathologist and also specializes in alternative and augmentative communication systems. So today we're going to be talking about, is AAC the right choice? Alternative and augmentative communication for adults with disabilities. And Paul's going to take us a little bit around and kind of look at both a transition age student and an adult, and whether or not is it too late for us to try these for people who need some assistance communicating. So thank you, Paul, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Carrie. My pleasure. Hi, everyone. I am really excited to talk to you today about this. This is a topic that's really important. I work with children ages 3 through adults, mostly people with autism spectrum disorder and developmental disabilities. And as Carrie mentioned, I focus heavily on using alternative and augmentative communication for adults and for kids and transition age people. So I'm excited to talk to you about that today. So first off, just maybe familiar to many of you, but what is AAC? So AAC is the replacement or augmentation. So we're either completely replacing or we're supporting oral speech with unaided or aided strategies. And so unaided is anything that you could just use your body to do, like signs or gestures, things like that. And aided strategies are those which require something outside of the body, outside of your body to communicate. And this is a spectrum of strategies and systems. And when most people talk about AAC, what they're talking about is the replacement of speech with some type of picture-based communication system. So why should one use AAC? Why is this a good strategy? Well, it allows people to say what they want to say. So if you're someone who does not have the speech skills to say what you want to say, that's obviously incredibly frustrating. It means that many people can't really express what they want to express. And so by having an AAC system, depending on this kind of skill level, people can say what they want to say with a high level of specificity. According to the U.S. National Joint Committee on Communication Disorders, people have the right to express themselves. It's a human right, and we certainly believe that. And so having a socially valid form of communication may increase independence, replace or reduce maladaptive behaviors, strengthen social connections, and allow access to education and vocation. So you can imagine how being able to accurately communicate can do all of these things, allow you to be more independent. If you're not, if you aren't able to say what you want to say, people may communicate through. So one reason why someone might have some problem behaviors is that they're having a hard time expressing themselves. Obviously strengthening social connections, this is so important. If you can't talk, it's hard to make social connections. And then obviously, work, social activities, education, these are really important things that AAC can help people attain. This is just a copy of the Communication Bill of Rights. I won't belabor it, but one that I like to talk about is the right to have access to functioning AAC and other assistive technology services and devices at all times. So this is something that I really drive home with people that I work with, that you wouldn't leave your words in a bag somewhere, or leave them at home. So when somebody has a device that's really their words, and they have a right to have access to those, and that's an important thing to drive home to people. All right, so let's talk about some strategies. So let's talk about low tech first. you're probably all very familiar with PECs. There's a number of low-tech strategies. So, like I said, PECs, a pod book. Basically, these are paper-based systems that can be used either in icon form. Sometimes it's a communication book. But this is what we would consider low-tech. And there's a lot of pros to low-tech communication systems. So they're inexpensive. They're easily accessible. I mean, really, if you have a printer, you can make a low-tech device, pretty easily. You can do that with pictures. You can do that with, Google Images. So this has become very accessible. They're also tangible. So if somebody needs something to grab onto, they provide a multisensory mode of communication, and that's really important for a lot of our adults, kids, people with communication disorders, and they're excellent for beginning communicators and requesting. So it might be a little bit harder to put some generative language together, which is, an important thing for many people. But when someone's really just learning to quickly request and they're beginning communicators, this might be a really nice strategy. And it could also be a really nice backup strategy. We always recommend having a paper backup so that people, if something happens with someone's device, they have access to this. Some cons, these can be hard to make. People lose icons often. People chew on them. They fall off. They break down quickly. It is, even though it's easy to access it, the continued reproduction of these icons in the books can get a little bit time consuming. And as I said before, they're not as robust as a high-tech system. So when I say robust, I mean there's not as many options for generative language. So that's, when I say generative language, I mean making your own utterances, making your own, saying what you want to say specifically. They also don't offer voice output, and that's an important thing as well. So high-tech, so they're robust, huge amount of language growth potential, and we say spontaneous novel utterance generation, that's SNUG. It's kind of the gold standard, is getting somebody to the point where they can say what they want to say and make up their own utterances. Dynamic display, so you can quickly make buttons navigate to another page or to another category, and that's important because you want people to be able to communicate as quickly as they possibly can, and these devices allow them to do that. Multisensory voice output, so you're getting voice output, which is great. It's great for the learner, and it's great for the AAC user, and it's great for the person that they're talking to. And you can change vocabulary quickly, so you can take a picture of something. If it's something novel, you can just snap a picture and put it in, and within 3-4 seconds, you can be talking, or the AAC user can be talking about that. There is some good research out there to kind of support the idea that speech-generating devices, so these are these high-tech devices, are superior to low-tech modes in supporting the development of spoken language. And that may be because of the dynamic display. It may be because of the voice output. But there's a good body of evidence to support that. Cons, they can be expensive. There are some prerequisites in some ways. I mean, you have to be able to navigate the iPad or the tablet, or make a point. So they're expensive. You have some barriers to entry, and they break easily. So, this can be a difficulty with people who have, some tendencies to break things, or some property destruction, and that can, of course, be expensive, but it can also set them back from using their primary mode of communication. And also, they can be confusing to program. So when there's multiple users and multiple people who are taking part in communicating, and maybe somebody at home or in a residence, or somebody in a job setting or a day hab who's working with this device, and having to program that can be really tough, especially when you're dealing with multiple people. It can get a little bit confusing. All right, let me talk about some barriers to AAC intervention. So recently, in the last 5 years, there's been an explosion of AAC devices. So, within the 10 years or so, we have iPads, we have tablets, and there's a wide range of consumer products that are pretty easily accessible to a lot of people. And that is absolutely fantastic. The issue with that can be that, with the ease of access, oftentimes people are starting on device trials. They hear, oh, great, this iPad, if you could use an iPad to speak, or, this can really change their lives. Well, it's true, but in order for this to work for somebody, really has to be individualized. So picking the right program and the right layout for that program and all the right features of that program is really, really important. And as you can imagine, when multiple people are involved, that can really throw off that process. So on the other hand, the evaluation process can be a little tricky. Oftentimes you have outside providers who are coming in and doing a great job of doing an evaluation and picking out a device, perhaps even providing that but that person may not be involved in an ongoing way. So, if that device is selected and, treatment providers change over a couple times, you can really end up in a situation where you essentially have a paperweight and people aren't really, aware of what's supposed to happen, all of the different things that go into using an AAC device. Oftentimes lack of collaboration. So again, we have people who are getting their needs met across multiple settings, people with very high caseloads. And so collaborating on when a device should be edited, how it should be used, progress in multiple settings can be really difficult. Lack of buy-in can be tough. There's sometimes, first off, there's no buy-in from the individual who's using the device. That's probably not going to work. But family members or other, stakeholders, if people haven't kind of bought into using this device, it's very unlikely that you're going to be successful. So that's a really important part of the process. And so decision-making goes back to that. And then all of that can really lead to abandonment or lack of use. And it's a scary number, but the most recent numbers they have on it is that up to 1/3 of all AAC users end up abandoning devices for a number of reasons, some of which I just spoke about. And as you can imagine, those are some real missed opportunities for language development, for people to communicate and talk about what they need, and not to mention the time of everybody involved, and of course the financial aspects of that. Barriers specific to adults, staffing and funding, I think, is a major barrier for anybody who provides services in the adult setting. When young people turn 22 years old, the staffing ratios go way down. There's just not a lot of funding comparatively, and that can end up being a real barrier with adults. They may have been staffed, 2-to-1 in one setting, and then it's they're at another setting where there's one provider for eight individuals, and the likelihood that that person is able to provide the level of support that the individual may need with their AAC, it can be really, really difficult. To say coordination of care, I think this is even more important in the adult setting because, as I said, with the lower staffing levels, it's harder to for people to actively coordinate with each other. The other thing is, established habits. So if somebody is an adult, they've kind of learned some habits, and family members have habits. We get very used to the way that we speak to each other. There's some research that says how you use your device at home is how you communicate at home is how you'll communicate for the rest of your life. So breaking those habits, there's some evidence to support that it's very doable, but it can be tough. And then preconceptions of individuals and stakeholders. So because of this, like the fact that somebody hasn't been perhaps using a device their whole life, you might think, well, that they can't, or that they're too old to learn, or any number of things related to kind of pigeonholing somebody. Again, the evidence is there that that's not always true. But that can really be something that's a barrier to using AAC in adulthood. Is it too late? Absolutely not. But it takes a lot of work. Some tips here, harnessing transferable skills. So if somebody's made it to adult services, they've had an education, they've learned many things. They probably have some real strengths. Perhaps they're fantastic at picture identification, or they follow routines really well, or they use gestural communication, have great eye contact. Whatever those are, you want to take those transferable skills and help put that into the acquisition of an AAC device. So if somebody has great initiation, or is just very social, those are skills that you can use that, or they've been using a picture point for years, and so they can identify picture, they have icons, then you could certainly use all of that. Think about that in the programming of an AAC device and transfer those skills over. And as I said, there have been some literature reviews. So these are large-scale literature reviews. I believe one with the meta-analysis that found significant levels of success in AAC interventions with adults. So when people really focus on this, they've seen some real success, and that's incredibly encouraging. All right, so what should you expect from an AAC evaluation? Well, you don't want somebody to come in and just say, with one device and one thing in mind, and say, well, this is what I use, so this is what we're going to use. You're not likely to be successful. Even if the device isn't different, we need to follow a feature matching process where we look at the needs of and the strengths of the student or the adult or the transitioning person, and look at that and say, all right, these are the skills that he or she has. I need to find a device that's going to meet those needs. And even if it's not the device itself, the language, the targets that are in there are going to need to be tailored to that person. And even the teaching strategy, or any number of things. So you want to make sure that whoever's coming in is comparing multiple systems. Typically, the kind of gold standard is 3 systems. You should get recommendations not only on the system, but on teaching strategies. How does this person best learn? Technical advice. How do you, edit buttons? How do you hide buttons, or, turn the voice up? All of these things are very important in making sure that you have that on hand. And there's tons of stuff available for this. I mean, most of the time, if you go on the durable medical equipment provider's website, they're going to have this stuff available for you. But I think you should expect that from an AAC evaluation. All of these things are played. Also, the visual display, obviously, what not just here's the device, but what's the layout that you want to see on the visual display? And the visual display is essentially how many buttons are on the front page and how do they navigate, and what type of folders are on there. So these are just a few things to think about, and that you should be getting recommendations on. A good AAC evaluation really needs to be followed up with training for all stakeholders. There's really no point in somebody just recommending something and saying, here, go ahead, here it is. These are kind of complicated devices in a lot of ways, and they've become easier and easier to use. But, getting training for all stakeholders, number one, it builds buy-in. It gets people to agree on targets and processes, and it lets people feel comfortable in using the device, which is really important, because it's unlikely that it's just not going to happen that with our population that the AAC learner, the AAC user, is going to be successful without support from their communication partners. And then there should always be some follow-up and troubleshooting to make sure that things are going as planned, and that, as you have questions, you're able to get some answers about how you can deal with that. This is just an example of an AAC prompting protocol, and this is something that I might hand out if this was appropriate for somebody. Just a visual one. This is widely used in the field. I believe it's adapted from Center, just because I don't have a citation there, but it's pretty widely used. And this is maybe for somebody who has some higher level skills. You would use this. You could do for mastered targets. You're going to do least to most support. So you pause, wait, give a gesture, and just essentially following this. And for somebody, when you're trying to teach something new, you'd start on this end and maybe start with a model, just some backward chaining. My point in this is to show you that visuals like this it's important to have them provided so that everybody knows how they're supposed to be teaching. Areas of assessment. So motor sensory. So does this person have the motor skills? Are there some sensory sensitivities that are possibly going to be an issue with noises, sound, etc.? Are they basically appropriate for this type of device? The symbols, people kind of do well with different types of symbols. So there's a hierarchy here. So if you can see on the right there, I have iconic to symbolic. So things that are more iconic, you have that picture of an iPad. It's something that we would call transparent. You know exactly what that is. The next one is translucent. It's symbolic, but it gives you a good idea of what's happening there, that break symbol. And all the way on the right, that's symbolic. Now, there's no way to know that would mean help unless you could read or you have learned that means help. So thinking about that, what types of symbols are going on a device is really, really important. And this can be overlooked at times. If you're the person that you're going to be evaluating or that's going to be trying out the system isn't ready to use symbols and they do better with pictures, you're not going to be very successful if you just use a kind of standard layout that just has, that's completely symbolic with all the icons. So really important. Literacy, can the person read? If so, can they spell? Then you've really opened up some options. And, you're going to pick a different layout based on that and make sure that they have a keyboard and that there's text buttons. And so that's really important. And then the grid size and layout. So are the pictures big enough? Do they have the fine motor to tap all the buttons based on the size? There's different layouts. So there's a visual scene. So visual scenes are essentially it's a picture of say a room with the voice output embedded into different pictures. So when you touch the picture of the chair in somebody's bedroom, it says chair. There's activity scenes, and these are, meant for just one activity. So you might take it, maybe somebody has an activity board that they bring to work with them, and it has all of their work vocabulary on it. So I won't belabor it, but there's different layouts. There's semantic syntactic, which follows kind of a grammatical layout, taxonomic, which is broken down in categories, and then there's MinSpeak, which is its own kind of system, and we don't have time to get into that today. But just to say, there are a lot of different options. So choosing a system, as I said, do they have the requisite skills? What does they say? We're going to run a trial. Let's see, are they able to accurately request the things that they need? Are they able to accurately talk about the things that they want to talk about? So you need to make sure that there's data collection, and that we're collecting data on the important things. It doesn't have to be done all day long, but we want to make sure that this person can independently, use the device for multiple functions. So when you're choosing, does the individual prefer the device? So if somebody really doesn't want to use the device, and it's rare that, it might start off this way, and usually people, once they realize that this is something that is going to make their life easier, then they're much more likely to be, to buy into it. But if someone has a real aversion to the device, good luck with really, being successful. You might have to go back to, maybe you want this thing, but, you might have to go back to the drawing board, because, individual preference is really, really important. As I said before, stakeholder buy-in. Are the stakeholders bought into this device? Are they, the home staff, the residential staff, the behavioral person, the speech pathologist who's working on the case, of course, the parents or the family members. That's really, really important. So stakeholder buy-in. Is it the best system for the long term? All right, so this is great. You got 4 buttons that have this person's 4 favorite things. That's great, but is that going to get them, is that going to grow with them? And all of those things need to be considered. We're just starting down the road. Is this device going to be appropriate for them if it's that limiting? And then, as I said before, other factors you really got to think. If this person's with destructive behavior, are they going to do some self-stimulation with the device? That's going to be a barrier to learning. Have they used devices in the past only for watching YouTube, and they're just going to really focus on, kind of obsess on getting out of the screen and trying to get to YouTube? In the case of a low tech, do they have pica? Might they eat the icons? Over selectivity is something where, people tend to go to the one spot, maybe the upper left-hand corner, over and over again. And then in that case, it might make sense to have a PEC system where you can change the icons along. So there's a lot of things to think of, and none of these would preclude one from using a specific device. It's just you have to think about in your planning and choosing the system how you're going to address those needs. Funding. So, the major way that people are funding now is by buying an iPad or a tablet. In most of the kind of popular systems are really just made for iOS, but there's some new ones coming out that can be used on other Android. And so that's great. There's a change here because there's obviously sometimes a difference in price. So that would be self-funded. And then sometimes you might go the route of a funded SGD or funded speech generating device, in which case you'd go through a durable medical equipment provider. And these can be funded through Mass Health. In this case, you're going to need an AAC specialist. So you're going to have to bring somebody in from the outside, unless the speech pathologist that's working with you has done these types of evaluations. And actually, at this point, many people have. You're going to need to involve the durable medical equipment provider. So this is a little bit longer. this process. But at the end of the day, you get a funded device, and I think it's supposed to last for 5 years, and there's some warranty on it for damages and things like that. So there's definitely pros and cons to both of these ways of funding, and you should discuss as a team what you think is best. As I said, general rules, when you're picking the mode, you want to pick the mode that's most reliable, that the adult and family prefer, allows for the highest level of language growth, can be understood by the most people. So oftentimes that speaks to speech generating devices, because if you're, sign is the most appropriate for a specific person, that's great, and that's what should be done. But it can't hurt to have at least a backup, so that anybody can really understand what somebody's saying. I always go with what's most socially acceptable. So in some cases, that may not be important, but for some people it is important. And it's really socially acceptable at this point to carry an iPad around with you. There's nothing really, plenty of people do that. You see kids carrying their iPads or tablets all the time. Adults carrying their iPads or tablets all the time. So, it wouldn't faze anybody to see, an adult, sitting in a restaurant using an iPad. So factors for adults when you're putting an AAC device into play, you want to focus on functional skills. Remember, we're out of school at this point. It's really supposed to be an academic approach. You want to focus on the skills that are going to help this person access their environment in the most functional way possible, vocational, day-to-day ADLs, and social. And so that's the social participation approach, looking at what this person's social life looks like as an adult, the things that are important, and focusing on that, not academics in any way. So, who's in their life that they care about that should be on there. What kind of things are they going to need to say in social situations, and what kind of words are they going to need for their jobs? So all of these things are really important. I think I mentioned this in the past, taking pre-existing skills and applying them to different situations. So as I said before, if somebody has some other skills that they've used for other modes of communication, carrying them over. And then there's other factors. So you want to really think about the types of language and visuals and the types of cases and things like that. And they may be a turnoff for somebody if they're not age appropriate. Now, it may not matter, and those are choices you can make as a team. But you always want to think about, when you're thinking about adults, that a lot of this stuff is really geared towards kids, and you want to make sure that as much as possible to the person's liking, that it's appropriate for their needs. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about transitioning to adult services now. So there are some challenges, all right? As I said before, many times people are coming from a high level of support, so they're used to, when they're communicating, they have a lot of support around communication. People really understand what they're saying. They've maybe had staff that have been with them for a long time. They're in the residential setting. Their staff's with a high level of staff members, and they kind of understand this person's got idiosyncratic ways of communicating. Well, upon transition, that may not be immediately the case. Not to say that the people in the adult setting aren't going to work just as hard to make sure that they understand all these things, but there's going to be definitely a gap, and they're going to be staffed at a lower level. And so the level of independence they have is going to become really, really important. So really starting early, preparing to really think about this. Now, I had some experiences with transitioning people into adult settings, and it really made me think about, right from the beginning, especially when I'm starting a trial with somebody who's in their, who's an adolescent or in their teens, how do we set them up for success when they get out of there. And one of the ways we do that is through what's called operational competence. And that's a fancy way of saying that's coined by Janice Light, excuse me. And that's a fancy way of saying, the ability to manage their own device. So do they know when the power's low? Can they plug it in? Not everybody's going to get there, but those are important skills to focus on. Do they know how to turn it on and off, turn the volume up and down? Do they have the strategic competency to know, the device isn't, loud enough right now. They can't understand what I'm saying. So really working on those skills is super important so that there's some ownership in the device. And that can really make a difference. And I definitely have kids and young adults and people who transition into adult settings. I'll talk about one towards the end, where they have some real ownership over their device, and they know how to take care of it, and they're not letting anybody take it away from them, and they're going to be successful. So that's really important. Identify the team. You want to identify who the team's going to be, who's going to be providing services, speech. If you're going to have an ongoing AAC person, who's that going to be? You want to identify them early and start talking about it and meeting as early as possible before that transition. And there should obviously communication should be one of the things that you're talking about. And so if you can, you identify the team and then you can start the training early. Talking about those expectations. This is exactly what we expect to happen as a team. These are the skills that this person has. We want to make sure that they're carried over. Here's all of the things that you're going to need to do that. So really setting clear expectations about communication. I have found that the teams that have done this the best, they've had the most success in their transition to adulthood. The families, the parents who said, hey, this is how my kid communicates. This is what we expect going forward. Let's get the team together so we can troubleshoot and make sure that we can do that. Schedule meetings ahead of time to make sure that, everybody's familiar with how the process goes and that you can make a really easy transition. Here is just one framework just related to picking a device and also making sure that everybody's on the same team. So I included this to think about in adult settings, but also in the transition to adulthood. And this is a school-based one, but it works for adults. But they say student, but let's say just person. What are their skills? Environment. Where are they going to be using the device? And who will they be communicating with? So if they're making that transition, what's that new environment going to look like? And what kind of changes we're going to need to make to the device? What are they going to be doing? Vocationally, socially, et cetera. And then the tool. What else, besides the device, they're going to need maybe a stand, if they're wheelchair bound, what kind of mounting system, and a durable case, a strap, all the different things that you need to think about how if they're going into work, the device needs to be versatile and they need to be able to put it in front of them and do their work and still be able to communicate. So just a kind of tool for thinking about how to do that. I always recommend using a total communication approach. And this is just multi-modalities. So using multiple modalities. This is most people, all of us, we're all total communicators. We make phone calls, we gesture, we write to people. And many students I definitely have young adults and adults that I've worked with who sign. Maybe they have a couple approximations for words, and also use a device, and that's great. And helping them have multiple ways to say what they need to say is really important. Here's why. I won't get into it, but essentially, it plays to people's strengths, and it supports expressive and receptive language, and it allows people to communicate in the way that they want to communicate. Okay, so this is important. So recently there have been a lot of advances in technology, and there are now some cloud-based apps which allow people to access devices from multiple devices. So you can don't have to worry so much about transitioning with devices, because if you have something in one setting, they can pull up their own app and use it, and it allows multiple people to be involved in editing and seeing what's going on. There's data logging. I'll show you some pictures of this. There's a program called Realize Language, and it allows multiple stakeholders to view data and set goals. So you'll see what that looks like. You can do remote editing and backup. You can save stuff to the cloud. All of these things have made it much easier to collaborate, because everybody can have access to data. Here's a picture of Realized Language, word cloud. So this shows what you can see. The most important word there was eat, but it changes the size of the word based on how much it's used. So this is just an example of somebody who I work with, and this is their iCloud. This is their word cloud, excuse me. It shows some data about how often the device is used, and so they've done pretty well here, right? They using it into the evening, from the morning. There's definitely some work that can happen. What is that, Monday, Sunday? Okay, that's Sunday, I think. So oh no. Well, anyways, the weekends weren't great. So, this allows us to say, hey, it looks like we need a little bit more work during this time to make sure that the device is being used and that so-and-so has access to the device. This is just another way to show how often things were, used on the device. Here's an example, the word cloud from a person that I worked with whose name is Sean. I'll tell you a little bit about Sean. Sean was in his 20s. I was called out to do a AAC evaluation, and he was using a low-tech picture point communication book, and showed a lot of great signs for communication. Could really identify pictures, was pointing really well, flipped through his book really easily, and so it was decided amongst the team that we would do an evaluation and with some high-tech devices. I was called in by his family, and everybody involved was really on board. We tried 3 different systems. We ended up going with a Word Power 42. So this is a Word Power 42 layout. So you can see, he also had some sight words, a little bit of an ability to spell and read. And so I knew that giving him access to something that was really robust and allowed him to kind of break out of what he could currently do was important. So we did our trial. I'm running kind of low on time here, so I won't go too far into it. But essentially, this is somebody in their 20s, given access to the right types of support. He had a really dedicated team, and people were really bought in, and he had the skill set. And he was ultimately able to be successful with this core word layout device, and now uses it to say multiple things, including, I think, here's part of his word cloud. So, not just requesting multiple things. You can see describing blue, orange, gray, a lot of playing. He loves to play ball and interact with other people, play Jenga. So it's really helped him access his environment. He uses this. He has a vocational job that he does. He uses it there to communicate with people, and it's also helped him communicate more effectively with family and other people in his world. So that's a real success. So I want to talk about Lisa. Lisa was a student here at the May, and she ultimately was going to be moving on to adult services. And I just going through that checklist that I showed you earlier. We did all of those things for her. We made sure that we met with the team early. The team was really invested. They came for trainings. She visited. And, Elise is one of those people that really, really, really did not want anybody to touch her device. She had real ownership. And so we really used that skill. We made sure that she could care for her own device, and that she, wasn't going to let anybody take it away from her, and make sure that it was plugged in so that she could use it and use her words. And when she didn't have her device, her levels of disruptive maladaptive behavior went way up. So there was a lot of benefit to making sure for everybody, particularly for her, that she had access to her words. And, so the team really understood that. With some training and identifying a team, identifying an SLP to carry over the programming of the device, she was ultimately very successful, and she made a successful transition into an adult setting. As far as I know, I haven't checked back in a little while, but she's doing really well. So I included those examples just because I think it's important to just show and talk about the fact that this is doable. It's just because somebody is a little bit older, or they're an adolescent or older, or they're an adult, there's still opportunity to improve, and there's still opportunity to use a high-tech AAC device or a low-tech AAC device, and that we should never give up on this. We want to be looking, want to make sure that it's an appropriate fit, but that we're not saying, hey, is this person, is too old for this, because that's oftentimes not the case. So, as a takeaway, I just want to say thank you very much. I have some references here. But I want to say thank you very much. And I just want to say that, like I said, it's not too late. Definitely, reach out to an AAC specialist, reach out to a speech pathologist if you think that somebody in your life could benefit from high-tech AAC, and make sure you give it a try. So thank you very much, and I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. That was a really great and comprehensive webinar you just did for us on AAC. So thank you all for joining us, and everyone have a great day.